What's up, you guys? Emma here. I wanted to jump on and do an update episode. I've been trying to do these periodically and a little bit more frequently than I was before. I get a lot of questions from you guys. There's constantly waves of new people coming in, and I know it's really difficult to keep up with the podcast in general because there's a lot of content. I do long form interviews. And I know that it can be difficult sometimes to keep up in addition to all of that with all the updates. So I thought I would come on and do an update for today's episode and just go over a few things, a couple common questions that I get that can hopefully help you guys understand why I do this podcast, some of the meaning behind it, the intention behind it, and what my vision was to begin with. I think sometimes people come in comparing it to other podcasts and not taking into account all the work, all the intention, and all the meaning behind all the things that I do that might be very different from a traditional podcast. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about today is one of the most common things that I get comments about, which is my podcast introductions. And in my last update episode, I touched on this, but I wanted to give it a little bit more attention because I think it's a really important part of my podcast. And if you're just jumping in and you just tune into an episode for the very first time, it can also be a little bit confusing, potentially, as to why I might be taking a long time at the beginning to talk. And some people might look at that as being rude or being inconsiderate without taking into account the context of why I decided to do that to begin with. So I want to start by saying, before I knew I was going to start a podcast, one of my absolute favorite podcasters is known for doing incredible introductions. He is amazing with how he introduces his guests, and his guests are always just absolutely blown away by the introductions that he gives them. And that was always really special for me to listen to. I loved listening to the guest's response after he was done. And also for me, I am a big picture person. There's typically two different types of people. There's a big picture person and there's a detail person. Some people really like to know the details, and other people really like to write right up from the front, get the big picture. Those are the people that go into the show notes and read about it, read about the episode. They are the ones that want to have an overview of what the episode is. And then there's people who are detail people. They just want to get right into the episode, right into whatever they're doing, and they want to just hear the details, hear the story. And that's totally fine. There's no wrong or right way to be. And all of us, depending on what the topic is, and just depending on what it is that we're consuming or doing, can be a mixture of both. We just might be predominantly one or the other. Myself, I'm a big picture person. I love to know in right away in the beginning what I'm going to read, what I'm going to listen to, what I'm going to watch, because I want to know if it's worth my time. I don't have a lot of spare time, and I haven't for many years of my life. And it's really nice for me to get an overview of something that I'm going to be doing or watching or whatever it is that I'm consuming or that's taking up my time and energy. I like to know if it's worth my time. And usually I can do that by, for example, reading the back of a book or looking at book reviews or checking out a TV show or whatever it is and having an overview of what it is, reading reviews from people. I like to know the big picture, and then I can enjoy the details knowing that it's something that's probably going to be worth my time and not something that I'm going to get into a little bit and regret starting. So my intros, I want to go over some of the intentions that I had for my introductions and some of the reasons why I do that the way that I do. So again, I loved how this podcast host that I grew up listening to introduced the guest, and it always warmed my heart so much whenever he was done, and the people that would come on his podcast. And he had a lot of really successful people on his podcast, a lot of people who got interviewed all the time. They would be so blown away by his introductions, and you could just tell it like set the tone for the episode. His guests felt really honored. They felt special that he put together something for them. And that he knew who he was talking to. I'm sure you guys have listened to podcasts where the host seems like they have no idea who they're talking to, that they didn't do any research. And it can sort of, I feel like that can come off as rude. And then again, if you're a big picture person, you just tune into an episode you're not going to have an idea of what's going to be talked about. You just see people diving into details, and it's like, okay, well, what is this about? What am I listening to? What am I getting myself into, right? So, for that reason, it was important for me to have something to where I could, and I played around with making it just the show notes, but I know not everybody reads the show notes. I wanted to have an option where people who were big picture people could have the big picture right from the start. And then also people who are detail oriented could get some details and then have an entire show filled with details immediately after I'm done with the intro. So I wanted to cater to both aspects of different people. And so I know some people that make these comments, I can tell that they're more detail oriented. They just want to get right into the details. They don't want the big picture. They don't want to see me talking about the big picture. It doesn't matter to them. A lot of those people will skip through the intro, go right to the meat and potatoes of the interview, and that's totally fine. And I do want to also say that if you're one of those people and the intros are not for you, and you're not a survivor, you're not somebody who's triggered and who sort of needs to know the big picture, it literally takes 2 seconds to fast forward the interview, 5 or 6 minutes, however long I usually do an intro. Um, it literally takes you 2 seconds, and you can do it right with your thumb or your pointer finger right from your phone. So there's it's seriously really easy, and I don't know why people would even try to complain about it. But I want you guys to also understand some more personal attention to detail and intention that is behind that as well. Because I think, again, when we're comparing this podcast to other podcasts that usually feature successful people, people who are coming on to talk about the best things of their life, um, there's usually rarely a reason during those types of podcasts that somebody could get triggered. They're usually happier conversations. They're positive. There might be some stories of struggle if the person's going on to talk about their backstory. But typically, most podcasts don't talk about trauma. So there's not a reason to cater your message to an audience of potentially traumatized and very sensitive people like survivors. So my podcast, this podcast, The Imagination, has a lot of survivors that watch. And it's a big part of my audience. And that is an intention, that's a responsibility that I have as a host, to where I know that the other person on the other side of the screen, if I'm just going right into details and I'm not giving a big picture, there could be somebody on the other end who gets triggered, and the responsibility is mine in a way because I'm not taking precautions to be and exercise due diligence to my audience, knowing that there's going to be survivors watching. So I wanted something to where I could have some type of a trigger warning on each episode. However, for me personally, when I'm consuming content or watching podcasts, I get turned off immediately if I see a trigger warning. And I usually know what that means. Like, I know that there's going to be some things maybe traumatizing that I'm going to be listening to, or something really difficult, something painful to listen to. But I feel like when trigger warning, when that's just on the screen, I feel like it can elicit a negative response when what I'm trying to do on this podcast is share hard things in a very positive way to spread awareness, to support the guests, and ultimately to stop all of this. And so to me, I didn't want any negative connotations where every single episode starts with this sort of like alarm bell of like trigger warning, because I don't like that. And I feel like if I was a survivor, I'd appreciate the trigger warning, but it also is kind of alarming. Like, it puts you in like, I don't know, it puts you in like an anxious state, in my opinion, when that's your first sort of message going into the podcast. So sure, I could make it a lot shorter and say trigger warning. But I think for some people that can also elicit a negative response. And again, that's not what I'm trying to do. I want this podcast to be shown in the most positive, uplifting, wholesome, authentic, genuine light that it possibly can be, taking into account that it's talking about some really hard things. So, again, knowing that a lot of my audience are going to be survivors, or people who have experienced trauma. Um, I wanted to provide details and a big picture for them. So instead of seeing a trigger warning, which can be triggering, I wanted the guests to be able to hear, excuse me, I wanted the audience to be able to hear, especially survivors, what is going to be talked about. That way they can decide if it's a trigger warning for them or not. Because that's the other thing. Triggers are different for everybody. So labeling something a trigger, it could be a trigger for one survivor and maybe it won't be for another. And so quantifying everything as a trigger warning to me also seemed like sort of slapping an umbrella phrase on something that might be a little bit more individualized depending on what the content is. Some things might be triggering to some people, some things might not. And so the introduction also gives the survivors on the other end the option to decide if what we're going to be talking about today, if the guest's backstory, when they hear an overview of it and who the guest is and some of what we'll be talking about, they can decide for themselves if it's going to be triggering or not. And then from there, they can decide, okay, I can dive into this today, or they can say, oh, this looks like it's going to be a little bit too much. There's some things that might trigger me. I might take it easy on this episode and skip it and come back to it whenever I'm feeling a little bit more stable mentally and can handle that. And so I want to bring awareness to that because look, you're really lucky if you didn't go through the trauma that my guest did. You're so freaking lucky because if you listen to these stories, they're absolutely horrific. What you hear humans, adults are capable of doing to young children and how it impacts somebody for the rest of their life. So when somebody's commenting negatively about the introduction, I can tell they're probably a detailed person. They're probably also not a survivor because a lot of survivors actually really appreciate my introductions because it helps them ground in listening and in being able to decide for themselves if the episode is going to be something that they can listen to in that moment or not. Now, there's a whole nother side to this as well. I cater it to my audience, knowing that there's going to be survivors listening. I also cater it to the guests. Again, going back to the podcaster, the host that I loved his intros and I loved seeing how it warmed the hearts of his guests. I wanted to give that. That was always something I was like, man, if I had a podcast one day, I want to do that. I want to make the person on the other side of the screen feel really special. I want them to know that I went out of my way to research them, that I know who they are, that I can say positive things and paint them in a powerful, positive light. And ultimately, again, not only are there survivors watching, but almost every single guest that I have on my podcast is a survivor. And in knowing that, hearing what they went through, if you guys have been listening to my podcast, these are individuals who were told the most degrading, heinous things about themselves growing up. People that were never acknowledged, never given compliments, never given some type of acknowledgement of how special they are and how incredible they are and the miracle that they are. We hear it all the time whenever you see, for example, if you're watching like the Oscars or these different award shows, you see how celebrities get walked on the red carpet with these incredible speeches to honor them if they're some type of an icon, and we know what goes behind the scenes with a lot of these celebrities, and that they're likely victims themselves, which is absolutely horrific to think about. But we do that for people when they're on a pedestal or somebody that we prop up in society. People like that are always given speeches of honor, and we listen intently, and it brings us to tears. We clap. We never say, why would you introduce that person that way? Why would you take all that time to say all these nice things? It's accepted when it's somebody who has these titles or who has a certain level of fame or stardom or celebrity, and in my opinion, I don't follow celebrities. I understand the model of all of that. And even though I still can enjoy content created by them, my heart goes out to these people because I know that they probably went through what my guests on my podcast did. So I have a different relationship with celebrities and fame. I see it very differently. To me, the people that are so heroic and people that I look up to are survivors. I think that they're just incredible. I can't say enough about, how hearing their stories has changed my life and has made me realize the power of the human spirit, the strength that we have as humans to overcome the incredible capabilities that our body has in moments of struggle, of torment, of despair, of just absolute deprivation of any humanity, that we can overcome those things. And every guest on my show deserves the intros, and there's nobody that can change my mind about that. And so I want you to understand that the guests coming on my show, you might see them get really excited, or maybe some of them don't on screen, but I can tell you with certainty that almost all of them, whether on screen or off, tells me that it's the best introduction that they ever had, and that they were almost brought to tears from it. And if you watch enough episodes, you see the survivor, the person that I'm interviewing, just be speechless for a moment, trying to take in that somebody acknowledged them, that somebody said nice things about them, that somebody put something together for them thoughtfully and researched them and made an intention to make them feel special. And I want you to just take that in. If you were somebody that was heinously abused your entire childhood, maybe even up into your adulthood, and somebody took the time to acknowledge you and make you feel special, that would be a really special moment for you. And on top of that, the other intention behind it is that these conversations that I have are really hard. They're really emotional. They're heavy. A lot of my guests who are newer to speaking out, and even some seasoned guests, this stuff's very triggering. No matter how many times you talk about it, I rarely have people that are to a point where it's not upsetting in some way to rehash all of this. Even if they've been talking for a really long time, there's still way more happy things in the world to talk about than your trauma. It's always upsetting to talk about trauma, whether it's on a level that makes you really emotional in the moment. And I've had guests cry on screen, and I cry on screen all the time too, as you guys probably see. Or if somebody can be very composed and calm and collected and share their story, there's still a lot more positive things that I'm sure these survivors coming on my show would rather talk about. And so being able to start my podcast on a really positive note by turning their story into an inspiration, turning their story into something that can be heard as miraculous, that can be heard as awe-inspiring, that can be heard as honorable and special, that gets my show started with like this positive note. And it sort of like eases the tension that the guest has sitting on the other side of the screen, kind of shaking, and it gives them a few minutes to compose themselves once I hit record. Because even hitting record, it's different than just sitting on the screen when it's not recording and you're talking to somebody. When you hit record, it's like game on, all of a sudden there's pressure and there's anxiety, and it just kind of it shifts the mood a little bit and puts this like real-time pressure on the person. A lot of my guests are very new to speaking out, so it gives them a few minutes as after they hit record to just have a moment to breathe for a second. And then while they're taking that breath, they're hearing really positive, uplifting, and wonderful things about themselves that can hopefully help sort of melt away some of that anxiety and some of that stress, some of the nerves of what we're going to be talking about and getting into. And I can see it when I go back and look at a lot of my episodes, especially with newer survivors speaking out. I can literally see with my own eyes some of that dropping out of them and easing, and seeing them sort of relax into themselves before we get into a conversation. And so I understand that some of you on the other side of the screen might not be survivors, might not be triggered, might not have any type of consideration needed in order to hear this content. But I also want you to look at my podcast differently than other podcasts that you're used to listening to. I want you to look at me as a host differently than other hosts that host different demographics of people. and take into account all that I have to do on my end to create a safe, comfortable place to talk about the hardest things that can possibly be talked about in the entire world, and that there's intention in every little thing that I do on my podcast. It's not just something I'm throwing together for no reason. I'm not putting together longer intros to annoy an audience. I know that somebody can scroll through it if they want. It takes 2 seconds, like I said, to fast forward the interview. And I also know that it can mean a lot to the person on the other side of the screen that is a trauma survivor, and that it means the world to the person that I'm sitting on screen with, who is talking about these really hard things and who likely hasn't had a lot of acknowledgement for what they went through. And right down to the fact that most of the crimes that my guests have went through are still considered conspiratorial. It's not even acknowledged widely that these things are 100% real. These are still gaslit crimes. It's the only crimes that aren't being persecuted the way that they should be, aren't being looked into, and are being dismissed. Every other type of crime in the world is something that we advocate for getting justice on, except RAMCOA, except ritual abuse, mind control, organized abuse. It's something some people are really passionate about advocating for, and that understand. And there's a whole chunk of people that still don't even look at it like it's a crime. They literally gaslight the person and don't even acknowledge what they went through. And the our own government hasn't even acknowledged that they've done this to children. They've acknowledged that they've done it to consenting adults, and they've put out different documents, and they've admitted and acknowledged some, but they haven't gone to the depths of talking about children and admitting what they did. And so just in general, this isn't even acknowledged as a crime through our very top authority, through our government. It's people like us that know it's real, people on the more ground level who are around survivors and who are consuming this content. And so I just want you please to just take into account the content that's talked about, the sensitivity of the person on the other side of the screen listening, and then also what it can mean to somebody who's sitting down for an interview, and how special it can make them feel to hear something that somebody wrote for them that honors them in a really positive way. So I hope that that clears up a little bit. I'm passionate about talking about this right now because I want to have an episode that I can send people in my comments who make that comment. And then also for those of you who might be questioning yourself, might listen and be like, oh, this, I don't hate the intros, but I don't know why she does them so long. I hope that this can be a little bit, um, maybe help clear any questions that you have, and just help you understand that this isn't an accident, that I do the things that I do, that it has a lot of intention behind it, whether you like it or not. It means a lot to certain people listening, and then to the person on my show, and even to me, because like I said, it was my dream that if I ever had a podcast, this is something that I would do. It would be a gift that I could give the person that I am interviewing. And for most people, it is a gift. So please just take that into consideration. Another thing that I wanted to talk about briefly today is a topic that I've talked a little bit about in previous update episodes, but really just the ability to sit with each guest and not be filled with judgment or wanting to respond by criticizing because the guest doesn't believe what you want them to believe, or doesn't believe what you want them to believe. Probably the second most common criticism on any of my podcasts is that a guest isn't too Christian enough, that they're too Christian, that they're too political, they're not political enough. They're talking about this person and they don't agree with it. So many nuances of what can possibly divide us instead of bringing us together. And I just want to make it really clear that my podcast is not political by nature. It's not religious. My podcast is not a divisive platform. It is a platform that invites all issues, all walks of life, all different belief systems into one place so we can hear every single type of story, so we can sit with every single type of person who has gone through trauma and actually be there for them, unconditionally loving them through it without feeling the need to have or kind of vomit up our own beliefs and immediately tune it out because that person doesn't believe what we do. You know, we have to learn to meet people where they are and to realize that division in itself is a program. And although it's okay for you on the other side of the screen listening to this right now to be passionate about your beliefs, to be surrounded by people who believe what you do or believe what you believe, and to have a voice for whatever it is that you believe in personally, whether it is politically, religious, whatever. We're not here to judge you. And if you're here, I hope that you're not here to judge other people because it's a negative circle that we run in doing that. Like I said, it's a program and it takes us away from hearing the person in front of us. If we're listening to respond with our beliefs and to make their testimony about us, then we're missing the point. It's not about you on the other side of the screen. It's about the capability that we have as human beings to sit with somebody different than us and to really take in what they went through, what they're saying, and to sit with that without feeling the need to say anything to rebuttal it, without seeing the need to judge, to criticize, to hold space for them, that we can hold space with somebody who has a whole different completely belief system than us because what they went through is hard. And what happens when we judge people is we not only make their testimony about us, but we miss hearing an incredible story. We miss connecting with somebody that we can learn from that is different from us. You know, what I try to comment to people who aren't rude, but have a strong belief system, if they're commenting under a video or if they reach out, um, is that their testimony isn't about you, that, you know, we can't expect everybody to think exactly like we do. You know, if I were to only invite people on my podcast that thought exactly like me, guess how many guests I would have? I would have zero guests, you guys. I'd have zero because nobody thinks exactly like me and nobody thinks exactly like you. And so my advice, if you're somebody that is very strong in your beliefs and some of what you hear challenges it in a way that makes you feel that you have to respond with your belief back to them or to judge them for not believing what you do or what you think that they should believe, is to sit and take all the information and just throw away what doesn't align. You know, you don't have to take in somebody else's belief system as yours, but they also don't have, they're not under obligation to take your belief system either and make it theirs. So if you can just sit there and listen with the intent of taking it in and keeping the thoughts that come up, push them down and realize that you're listening to somebody other than you and that it's okay to have a different belief system, that it's okay for people to be different, and that when you make these judgments, you're missing out on hearing an incredible testimony. And you can take everything and take all the information and whatever resonates, keep it with you. And if there's beliefs, if whether it's political, religious, or otherwise, that you just know that you'll never buy into and that it's just not something that you align with, just set those off to the side and sit with all the rest of it and take that in and let it be something that changes you. Let it be something that impacts you in a positive way and that you can sit with and that you can be there and hold space for, because that is what this is about. This is for all walks of life. This is to show that there is no demographic, there is no religion, there's no political side that carries the weight of pedophilia, of ritual abuse, of mind control, that this is a global problem, that it has infiltrated and it affects every single aspect of society, um, every religion, every political side, every country, every city, every state, every town, every institution, every church, every type of business, every aspect of our government, every nook and cranny of the planet, every race, every societal class, every single socioeconomic class, there's no little box that this fits into. And this podcast is to demonstrate that, to show you that this is happening in every single country, that it's happening in every religious institution, that it's happening on all political sides in every single country, and that that's a problem. It's a big problem. I wish it was as easy as fitting it into a little box and being like, okay, this is the exact type of person that we need to blame for all this. This is who's responsible, but it's so much bigger than that. And unless we can take that in and sit with that and realize that this is everywhere, right? From the non-believer all the way to the stout Christian, right to the radical left to a radical right sitting political believer or supporter, that this spans so much and that we have to listen to these different types of stories to understand the depth and the amount of places in the world, and that this affects and that this hasn't been sort of snuck into. And so I hope that this is making sense and that it's sitting with you. It's sort of hard to explain because to me this was just like second nature for me, that I didn't want this to be a podcast that had any type of side. This is the thing that can bring us all together, you guys, no matter what our political preferences, no matter what our religion is, no matter what our beliefs are, no matter what language we speak or what country we're in. This is the one issue that can bring all of us together. Everything else divides us, and that's why the government will never give us a movement for this. For one, they won't even admit it. But for two, this is the one thing that they know will bring us together. That's why they do everything in their power to create division and to compartmentalize society and to fracture all of us. So we remain compartmentalized and judgmental and have our little hierarchies of how we think that we need to interact with each other and where we stand in society and who's right and who's wrong and you're the bad guy and you're the good guy and this is the best side and that's the wrong side. You know, all these different little nuances, they're all programs. We are all human and we don't need to have and conform to one specific belief to matter. Our political side and beliefs, our religious beliefs, make us, do not make our trauma any more or less. You know, trauma is trauma, no matter where you stand on any belief system. And I want this to be a safe place for everybody to feel comfortable sharing their story, knowing that the listener, that you on the other end of the screen, will be compassionate enough to throw all your beliefs aside, to throw them out, and to say, you know what? I'm going to sit with this person that I'm listening to and I'm going to take in everything that they say. And it doesn't mean that their beliefs have to match mine. It doesn't mean that my beliefs have to match theirs, that I'm going to listen to this person who went through and survived crimes against humanity. And that's how I approach all of this. That's why I can sit with a non-believer. That's why I can sit with somebody who is political, even though I'm an anarchist and have no political affiliation. I can sit in agreement with somebody and be level with them and have a conversation with them because I do not judge them, because I do not condemn them for what they believe, because I love them and acknowledge that they went through something really horrible and that those beliefs do not make or break what they went through, that what they went through is trauma and it's a crime no matter what their beliefs are. And so I hope that that makes sense. I wanted to bring that up because as more people find this podcast, I'm getting these really negative tone messages via email as well as underneath some of my videos where people just spew that they're not happy with what this guest believes, that it's too much this or too much that or not enough this and not enough that. And you know, we really have to get better as a society of being okay if somebody is not in the same belief system as us, whatever it is that we're discussing. You know, and the other problem with division is it puts me against you, it puts you against another fellow human, and It doesn't allow us to come together and unite against the real enemy, which is the people being exposed through these guests of all walks of life on my podcast, and that these guests exposing are not exposing one political side of person or one religious body. They're also exposing all walks of life who are involved in these crimes. And so we also have to open up our eyes and come together against them and be able to unpack these different exposés, look at the locations, the demographics, the type of person, the names, the families involved in this, and realize that it doesn't fit into one neat little package, that we need to expose all of it. And that also comes with opening up our minds to what we're able to accept. And so without people coming out of these institutions, if we only had one type of person, we wouldn't know where else this is hiding. And so it's a blessing that we get to hear all walks of life of people, because we can now know where this hides, and we can also be there for somebody who's on our side. We're all wanting the same thing if we're on this side of it, and that's to go after the bad people in these institutions. And we cannot forget that. We cannot forget that, because then we're not together. We're not stronger. The enemy is in, again, they're in every single religious body. They're on all political sides, and they're still unified together. They're together. They are not pitted against each other. They are together. They're moving as one unit, and they're doing it smoothly, and they've been doing it for a long time together. And here's all of us, like, we all have the capability of coming together for these causes and to support each other no matter what we believe. And we're all freaking divided and pitted against each other. And it is so, I'm sorry, but it's pathetic. We can do better. We're failing children. We're failing generation after generation because we can't get our act together, because we can't come together, because we're always pointing fingers at each other. You're to this, or you're not that, or you're this. We're the enemy again. They're all walks of life. There's every single type of person possible involved in these crimes, and they're working together as one unit, and they've been covering it up and getting away with it for a long time. We have to be better than that. And that comes with not pointing our finger at the person coming on my podcast to share where these people are hiding and what they went through, but it's to listen to what they say and to point the finger at the person and people responsible for the crimes that the guests on my podcast went through. Okay. So please keep that in mind whenever you guys are listening, and before you get tempted to type on the screen via email to me or to the guest underneath one of their videos, before you feel that need and react to that judgment that comes up whenever you're listening, think about who you're pointing the finger at, and think about who you should be pointing the finger at, because they're two totally different people in that moment. And we need to come together and point the fingers at the predators, the perpetrators, the abusers, the criminals, the criminal enterprises, the organized crime syndicates that are committing these crimes. That is the enemy. That's who we all need to unify together and point our fingers at. Um, so that was my long-winded way of sort of setting a tone and helping you guys understand that this podcast isn't about my beliefs. It's not about your beliefs. It's not even about the individual guests' beliefs. It's about cumulatively all of us together coming together and exposing where this all is, to be able to sit without judgment and listen to somebody different, and to be able to put our beliefs aside and be there and share space and hold space for somebody that might be 100% different than us, and that might be a polar opposite of us, to just be a loving human being. And I hope that makes sense. What else can I talk about today? One thing I wanted to talk about and bring up before I forget is that I'm doing this incredible series on Tuesday nights. It's called Movie Night. And right now, currently, as you guys see this, I'm airing a really amazing series that is definitely not getting as much traction as some of my other videos, but I'm hard pressed to say that it's not just as important as the current videos that I'm putting out. This is a series from 1997 on CKLN radio up in Canada. It was actually a radio broadcast that went on for months, put on by a radio host named Wayne Morris, who interviewed and aired lectures by leading specialists, therapists, survivors speaking out at the time in 1997 when this aired that were pioneering what we know today to be true about mind control still. And it is an incredible series. It is like the foundation of understanding Ramkoa, and it is incredible looking back at 1997 and even before. Some of these lectures that are being aired are from like 1995, 1996, maybe a little bit earlier. But these lectures are absolutely incredible, these episodes, and what is being talked about is like even more advanced, even more intellectual in some ways than things that we know and that are talked about now. It's incredible. Um, I really feel like if you take the time to go and listen to this radio series from front to back, that you are going to have such a better idea of what you hear on the podcast from these guests, and that it's going to make a lot more sense to you, that you are going to feel more empowered with information, and that you're going to you're going to be light years ahead of anybody on understanding all of what's talked about on my podcast. It is incredible. These therapists that are sharing the testimony that was told all the way back then. And we know this from even people like Kathy O'Brien, who were talking a long time ago. We can reference, how her story has never changed. She's been saying she was before her time, but she also wasn't the only one. There were people out there that were helping and trying to expose this and putting their voice out there and researching this with the limited ability that they had without all the technology and ways to connect that we today have. And this series is just amazing. The researchers and the professionals and the therapists and the survivors testifying, it shows that there's literally nothing new under the sun, that what we know today, the same things that are being testified today in 2025, all the way back in 1997 and before, the same exact things were being testified and happening. And so it's really incredible to go back and listen and to hear how far ahead they were. And they're even more ahead than many of us today are. The people that, the experts today, some of these people that were speaking out way back then, and some of them have passed away, were miles ahead of anything imaginable. And it's just incredible to hear how great of an understanding they had of things like mind control and ritual abuse, governmental involvement in all of this, cult abuse. Hearing all of it, it's just like it's mind blowing, and it is absolutely incredible information. I hope that you go back if you haven't, and that you listen to that series and you follow along. One of the cool things that you'll see in the future, Kevin Annett, who's been on my podcast many times, many of you love him. Um, he actually has an interview on that series. When I actually got to meet Kevin for my podcast to have him on, I was like, gosh, I swear I've heard of this guy before, whenever I was listening to him and in what he was exposing with the residential and Aboriginal abuse, mind control, and genocide. I was like, I know I've heard this guy before. I'm positive heard of this guy before, but I don't know where. And I realized it was from this radio series. Kevin has an interview on this mind control radio series from CKLN all the way back in 1997, and that'll be airing a little bit later on in the series. I think it was one of the last episodes. But man, he was even incredible then. So I'm excited to share that one with you guys, because when I even told him about it, he was like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot about that one." He's like, "Let me know whenever you air it. Like I haven't heard that in forever." So it's really special. It's neat to see. But these are the people that help pioneer like what we know today for this, and they're the reason why my podcast has a platform. They're the reason why so many survivors have a voice, why we are where we are today, which is miles ahead than even where they were. But their knowledge of all of this was just exceeded anything that you could possibly imagine. So please go back and watch that. Again, that's the CKLN Mind Control series airing Tuesday nights on my channel on movie night. And if you guys find this specific episode after the series ends, you can go ahead back on my playlist and I will have a playlist. And even right now, you guys listening, I have a playlist you can go click on. Please, please, please listen to those episodes. They are so valuable. And they're definitely not, they're underrated on my channel for the information that is being shared. If that information was shared today the same way that it is in these lectures and interviews, they would get way more views. Just because it was in 1997 or 1995 doesn't make it less valuable. I promise you, you will be blown away by some of these interviews, lectures, and these researchers and individuals who were sharing about all of this. So I'll have that playlist. Maybe I'll just link it down in the show notes below for you guys. But I had put a post out recently asking you guys if you guys had questions for me, about my podcast, and I do plan on answering some of those questions. I just really felt passionate about sharing these few things today because they've been weighing on my heart. And as my channel is growing again for the third time, for those of you who don't know, I had two other channels terminated. This is my third YouTube channel. Third time's a charm, I really hope. But as my channel starts growing, more people come on. I just want to be able to reference answering some of their questions about my intros, about personal beliefs, being shared about in a negative way about the guests and about the listeners' beliefs, and to be able to have episodes that are in my library that I can just go link on those comments and say, oh, you must be new here. Here is a episode where I go over and answer your question thoroughly. So hopefully you have a better idea of why I do things the way that I do here. But I promise you guys, everything I do is very intentional. Everything from start to finish in my interviews. You guys have no idea the time on top of working a full-time job, which I do, and it's more than a full-time job. I work more than just full-time during the week. Um, this is what I devote pretty much all the rest of my time to that I could possibly with the time that I have without sacrificing, other things in my life, taking care of myself and my relationship, my dog, all these little things, there's certain priorities and things, but literally like the rest of my time goes into this. You guys have no idea the amount of time that I put into all of this, how much intention, how much I communicate with every guest before they go on, especially new guests or people that I don't know. There is a lot of time that I spend talking to people, whether on the phone, emails, messages, all of the above. Planning for the interview, I have an entire template that I send most of my guests that go over different ideas of things to talk about. We organize what we're going to talk about together and what we're not going to talk about together. And I do not talk a lot during my podcast, which is another reason why I talk in the very beginning, because after I'm done talking in the intro, I try to shut up and listen, just like I encourage you guys to do. I know that a lot of you show me love, and I'm so appreciative of that. However, if it was only me always talking, I'm sure many of you wouldn't be as engaged here because let's face it, it's the guests that you guys come to see. I'm really grateful again that you guys support and appreciate me and all the love that you show. But I know it's because you love the guests that come on and the space that we share together, getting to listen to them, which is because of you guys. You guys help make it and keep it safe, and I can't thank you enough for that. But yeah, I don't like to even talk a lot during the interviews. I like to encourage the guests to talk, and when I do talk a lot, that is also intentional because there is nerves, there is a need for a back and forth for comfort. I've learned how to read the room, and it's not been easy in a lot of ways. These episodes challenge me in a lot of ways. I'm having to process a lot of information and a lot of trauma myself, listening to really hard things on the spot. and then having to have a discussion about it with a lot of times somebody I don't know very well. And that I'm hearing just these horrible things that they went through, just like all of you. So it can be a lot for me to do this, but if I'm talking more in an episode, that is very intentional and it is what the episode needs or what was discussed that would happen. And if, just like during most of the episodes, if I am more conservative with how much I say, that is also by design. I want to give the guests as much room as possible to talk. This is a space for them to testify, to share their testimony, not a place for me to interrogate them, not a place for me to interrupt them, to talk over them, to in any way, shape, or form show any type of disrespect to the guests. And so that's another thing some people say, why don't you ask more questions or why didn't you do this? Because it works exactly the way that I'm doing it, and that's by design. That is what was talked about with the survivor. That is what we wanted together for the vision of the episode. We both knew what was going to be talked about, and they only have to show up and share. They don't have the added pressure of being interrupted and having to remember where they were at, being condemned, being interrogated, being asked a bunch of questions that maybe they didn't even want to talk about. Please consider that too, that there's boundaries that people have that come on my show, and I respect that. I don't, if I'm not asking specific questions that you guys are wondering why, there's probably a reason for that. And you might hear me ask another guest some of the questions that you guys have. Um, but there's boundaries, there's safety, there's protection, and there's a lot of intention. Like I said, there's a lot of work that goes into talking about these really hard situations and childhoods and stories of survival that my guests come on and testify. So that's my long-winded way of saying a few things that I wanted to get out today. So I really appreciate you guys listening. Like I said, I'll try to make some more episodes, maybe answering some personal questions that you guys have. But if there's little short episodes that you guys want me to do, whether it's on education on something, I obviously don't know everything. I don't claim to. I am just somebody who listens and takes in and learns information. But if there are little topics that I can do on shorter episodes, if there's questions that you guys have about me, about my podcast, about podcasting, about anything, leave them in the show notes below. You can also feel free to email me. I'll have my information below. Um, I want you guys to be able to have a say on what's talked about on episodes like this. So, if there's something that I can answer for you or a question that you guys have or something I could do a little education on, as best as I can, given everything that I've learned from my guests, I am very happy to do that for you guys and would love to have more sort of interactions. So, thank you guys so much. I honestly, I'm blown away. I talk about some of the negative things that I get on this podcast on these little short update episodes. But really, the majority of you that tune in are so respectful, so loving, so kind, so generous, so supportive. I mean, my podcast guests are always just blown away by the comments that you guys leave. For being such a small channel, the heart is so big here. The love is so big, the support and compassion and the ability to hold space and to really do the opposite of some of the negative things that I talked about. And I can't thank you guys enough for that because the positivity, the space that you guys do hold and the support and the love, um, it's really second to none. I couldn't fathom having a better community. And I think all my mods that are there every Tuesday, Thursday and Sunday evening. I love them. They help keep the community safe. If you guys aren't yet hanging out in the live chats on the premiere days on YouTube and Rumble, I would really encourage you guys to, especially YouTube. That community is getting bigger and there's a lot of regulars that come in there, a lot of survivors. Sometimes even the podcast guests come in and hang out if they have a YouTube channel. And it's really fun. It's a great place to connect. And obviously, it's a long form interview. So you get some time with the people in the chat to connect with them. And it's a really beautiful community and it's very safe because of the wonderful team that helps me on those nights. So thank you guys. You guys know who you are. And thank you all for listening and for sticking with me during this update episode. I hope that that makes a little bit of sense and puts some context into some of the intention behind this and sort of some of the personal motivation and like my inspiration for having some of these ideas to begin with. Um, I just I want this to be a really special space and I want it to be special in every way for every reason and to take into account all the different people listening, the type of person that is being interviewed, and my own passions and like my own heart I want to shine through, and for me to be authentic to myself and to have my own personality and my own flair. I think it's cool that I do something different than a lot of podcasts do in so many ways. I think it's cool that my podcast is unlike anything else in the world and that I chose something that wasn't popular to do, when choosing what I would ultimately settle on for a theme for my podcast. I could have went a totally different route and chose something that would have been more popular, that wouldn't have got terminations and judgments and condemnations and, spiritual warfare against me and targeting and, but I didn't, and I take pride in that. I'm really proud of what I've built, what we've built together. And it's really special, and I'm excited to see where it goes in the future. So I couldn't do this without you guys. I'll have all my information below. If you guys wanted to follow me on other social media platforms, I'm on pretty much all of them. And YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, iTunes, Spotify. Connect with me wherever you can. As confident as I am that things will be a little bit smoother without getting terminated. Um, you still never know. Platforms like YouTube can be really volatile. So follow me on all different platforms if you guys can. I'm so grateful for you guys. Thank you so much for listening as always. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.